The old tracks hadn't seen a train in nearly 40 years. They were warped in places, swallowed by tufts of dry grass, and forgotten by everyone in town except for one man. Every morning at sunrise, the young man would walk to the abandoned station, carrying his tools. He'd open the rusted gate, step onto the cracked platform, and begin his work on the old locomotive as if the train might depart at any moment. He didn't speak much. Most folks in town didn't even remember his full name. They called him Rail or Switch, some sort of nickname from his youth, back when people still believed the tracks might matter again. But now he was more of a ghost than a neighbor always. Quiet, always alone, always kneeling beside the same iron bones that had long since lost their purpose. The station was barely more than a shell. Peeling paint, shattered windows, and a ceiling that dripped whenever the rain remembered to fall. The ticket booth still had faded price lists behind the dusty glass, and the station clock remained frozen at 3:07, its hands stiff from disuse. The train itself was no better. A rust-eaten engine, 3 warped cars behind it, seats split open by time and rodents. And yet, the young man tended to it like a priest tending to a shrine. He polished the brass trim on the cabin. He rewired the lights that hadn't flickered in decades. He oiled the wheels and replaced broken panels, piece by piece, month after month, year after year, that no one had ever seen it move. Old men at the diner whispered that the train was cursed. Kids dared each other to sneak into the yard at night. Teenagers laughed behind the gas station, saying he was building a time machine or waiting for ghosts. But the young man never reacted. He never defended himself, never invited questions, never explained why he poured 9 years of his life into something that, by all logic, could never come back to life. It wasn't about logic. Every action he made was ritual. Every sound, the screech of a bolt loosening, the chime of a wrench on steel, was part of a quiet song only he understood. He believed in the train. Or perhaps, more accurately, he believed in what the train meant. And though he never said a word about it, some of the older folks remembered a story. They remembered that his grandfather had once worked that very same line. The 3:07 route. People called it because that was the hour it always left the station. There'd been an accident back in 1962, a derailment in the canyon. No survivors. No explanation. No recovery, except the train was never found. Some claimed it vanished. Others said it burned. But one man had returned from that tragedy broken, quiet, and carrying only a conductor's whistle around his neck. That man was the young mechanic's grandfather. And now, decades later, the boy rebuilt what his family had lost. Not just metal and steam, but memory. Maybe redemption. Still, the train never moved, but he never stopped believing it might. Not until that night 9 years later, when the clock inside the station, long frozen at 3:07, suddenly ticked forward 1 minute, and outside, on the tracks that led nowhere, something stirred. No one in town could remember exactly why the train had stopped running. Some said it was a storm. Others mumbled about a fire in the canyon, or sabotage, or even something stranger like the land itself had turned against the tracks. But when asked directly, they would shrug and say, "It's just how it's always been." There were no newspaper clippings, no photographs, no official records. The station ledger had a blank line where the date of the last departure should have been. Just a thin tear in the page, like someone had tried to erase it with more than ink. But the young man's grandfather had always spoken of that train as if it still ran, even after the accident. Even after the silence. Even after the world moved on. He would sit in his old rocker, staring toward the hills where the tracks disappeared into pine and dust, and whisper, "It's not finished yet. One day, it'll come back. And when it does, it'll need someone waiting." The boy had been no more than 10 when he heard that sentence for the first time. And though his grandfather had never explained what it meant, the words burrowed deep, growing roots in the soft soil of youth. Long after the old man had passed quietly, one night in that same rocking chair, the promise remained. He would wait. He would rebuild. The young man had never asked for proof. He didn't need it. The way some people believe in stories, and others believe in science, he believed in that train. In its weight, its memory, its unfinished journey. He found parts in junkyards, bought rusted scraps from scrapyards 50 miles away, learned wiring from manuals printed before he was born. Every bolt he turned felt like pulling something sacred out of the dark, and yet people around him called it a fixation, a delusion. They watched from their porches as he pushed a wheel axle up the hill by hand, sweat-soaked and wild-eyed. They heard the clinks and hisses echoing across the tracks after midnight, but no one stopped him. Because deep down, everyone respected a man who worked that hard for something no one else could see. Still, they didn't understand that the station's clock, forever paused at 3:07, remained unmoved. The conductor's booth remained silent. The whistle, hanging from a nail in the engine cab, never stirred. But the young man still waited. Each evening, he would close his toolbox, sit on the platform's edge, and look westward. Not just to the tracks, but to the gap in the canyon where the train was last seen. As if the light itself might bring it back. He never told anyone the truth that he didn't know what exactly he was waiting for. Whether it was the train or the passengers, or some echo of the past refusing to die. All he knew was this. His grandfather had believed it would return. And that was enough. Until one morning, he arrived at the station and found something different. A thin line of fresh coal dust stretched from the engine's rear wheel, where no coal had been placed in years. And on the conductor's chair, a single, perfectly folded train ticket, stamped with tomorrow's date. The wind had a way of slipping through the station at night, soft, steady, and just cold enough to make the skin remember it was alone. The young man often stayed late these days. Ever since he found that folded ticket, sleep had come slower, and time had taken on a different weight. He would work with a strange urgency, though he didn't know what he was racing toward. That night was no different until it was. The platform was still. The stars overhead watched in silence. And then, as he tightened the last bolt on the brake lever, a soft click echoed from the train's interior. He turned. One of the interior cabin lights, dead for years, was glowing. Just one. Not flickering, not broken. Just on. The warm amber glow cast itself across the faded upholstery and aged wooden trim. Dust floated in the air, slow and weightless, like it too had been waiting. He walked toward the train door slowly, one hand resting near his wrench, not out of fear, exactly, but out of instinct. The way you reach for something solid when the world begins to bend. The door opened with a soft creak. Inside, the air felt different, warmer, charged, as if the breath of the past had returned to sit for a while. He stepped in. No one, only the light, only the hush, only that faint scent of something familiar, coal dust, old leather, maybe even pipe smoke. He stood for a long time, watching the soft halo the light created around the seat below it. A window beside the chair was cracked open slightly, and beyond it, the desert whispered. Then, movement. From the corner of his eye, near the far end of the platform, he caught it. A figure. Small, barefoot, a child. The silhouette stood motionless near the rails, framed by starlight and emptiness. No sound, no breath, no motion except the faint ripple of clothing in the breeze. He stepped off the train, calling out, not loudly, but gently, the way you speak in a chapel or a dream. The child didn't move. He walked forward, his boots careful, on the wooden planks. And then, as he reached the spot where the figure had been, nothing. No footsteps, no retreating shadow, just the faint scent of dust and metal. He looked around, heart steady but alert. The kind of stillness before a decision is made. He had felt this before when his grandfather died. That strange stillness that came before change. He returned to the train and found the cabin light had turned off. But the seat below it? Warm too. The touch for the first time, he didn't feel afraid. Not truly. He felt something else. Something older. Something closer to recognition. Like a whisper from the tracks themselves saying, "You're not alone anymore." It was the kind of night when even the stars seemed hesitant to shine, when silence didn't just settle over the land. It pressed down. He hadn't meant to wake at 3 a.m. His alarm was still set for dawn. But something stirred him gently, without panic, like a soft voice calling him through sleep. His eyes opened wide, and the room felt different. Not cold, not warm, just ready. He dressed without question, like a man walking into a memory he hadn't yet made. The boots slipped, uneasier than usual. The oil lamp lit with a single strike. Every motion felt guided, as though each movement had already been written. Outside, the wind had stopped. The usual hiss of desert breeze through the sagebrush was gone. The world had paused. He crossed the yard to the station, the gravel crunching underfoot, the only sound. The old train sat waiting, moonlight resting on its metal skin like frost. He stepped onto the platform, and for the first time in years, the train seemed expectant. Like it had always known this moment would come. Without thinking, he went. Straight to the engine room. His hands moved quickly, checking pressure valves, adjusting knobs. But it wasn't urgency that drove him. It was rhythm. Familiar, practiced rhythm, one he shouldn't have known, but somehow did. 3:12 a.m. He glanced at the large clock on the wall above the departure board. Its hands had stopped long ago, but now they ticked. Once, twice. The sound echoed across the station like the first drops of rain before a storm. Then he heard it. Steps. Far off, near the edge of the property, soft, slow, deliberate. Not boots, not shoes, just footsteps. On dirt, on gravel, on old stone. He stepped out of the train, holding his breath. Not out of fear, but reverence. From the distant ridge beyond the tracks, shadows moved. Not running, not rushing. Just walking, straight toward the platform. Figures, silhouettes. 11. Their outlines shimmered slightly in the faint moonlight. Cloaks, long coats. One wore what looked like a wide-brimmed hat. Another held something long, maybe a walking stick, or a lantern. No faces. No voices. But the sound of their steps grew clearer with each second. Steady, balanced, like they'd walked this road 100 times before. He didn't move. He didn't run. Something inside him whispered, "You've been waiting for them," and maybe he had. The figures came closer, but not fast. They seemed in no hurry, like they knew the train wouldn't leave without them. Like time obeyed them, not the other way around. At exactly 3:33 a.m., they reached the edge of the platform. The man stood just beside the engine, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something else, like awe or gravity. And the passengers, they didn't speak. They didn't ask questions. They simply stepped one by one onto the train. Seats groaned under weight for the first time in decades, and he stood there, unable to say a word, just listening. Because deep down he knew, whatever this was, it had started long before him. But now, it had reached him, and he was no longer just the man who fixed the train. He was the one who had to decide whether to drive it. The man with the cane arrived just before the wind changed. He didn't say a word as he stepped onto the platform, just the soft click of the cane against worn wood, slow and even. Tap, step, tap. His coat was long and heavy, dark, as river mud, and dust clung to it like memory. His hat sat low, hiding the better part of his face, but the lines in his jaw hinted at a life that had carried weight for far too long. The young man didn't move. He stood near the engine car, one hand resting on a cold brass lever, as if waiting for a command he couldn't hear. The train, for all its age and rust, felt alert again. Not alive, not quite, but not dead either. The old man paused at the train door. It didn't open. Not immediately, but still. He waited, patient, like someone returning to a ritual too old for clocks. And then clicked. The door slid open with a sound. Like breath returning after a long sleep, the old man stepped inside. Not with hesitation, with purpose. The carriage swallowed him in shadows, and the young man followed a few steps behind, close enough to see, but not to intrude. Inside, the seats were as he had left them, lined with cracked leather, speckled with dust, the faint scent of old oil and time clinging to the wood. But the air had changed. The moment the old man crossed the threshold, something shifted. The cold receded slightly, like the train itself acknowledged him. He moved slowly down the aisle, his cane clicking between the benches, eyes scanning each seat with a strange rhythm. Left, right, pause, look again. But if he recognized anyone, he gave no sign. He passed by a bench near the middle of the car, then stopped. Not because he saw something, but because he felt something. The young man watched from the doorway, barely breathing. The old man turned, facing the bench, and lowered himself carefully onto the seat. He placed his cane across his lap and folded his hands on top of it. His hat stayed on. His eyes stared forward, seeing nothing and perhaps everything. He didn't ask for a ticket. He didn't speak a name. He just waited. The train remained still, the engine cold, the lanterns unlit, but somehow the moment felt full, like something long delayed had finally arrived. The young man stepped back out onto the platform, unsure what role he now played. He wasn't a conductor, not officially, not by any job he'd ever held. But the train had opened its door, and someone had entered. And now, a single seat was no longer empty. The air carried a quiet hum, the kind you only hear when you stop expecting noise. A moment later, from beyond the tracks, another shape moved in the dark. Not a man with a cane. Someone else. Someone coming. And inside the train, the old man sat motionless, calm, silent, and utterly still. As if he'd been waiting not for departure, but for company. It didn't stop with the man and his cane. The next night, precisely at 3 a.m., the wind shifted again, soft but certain. The kind of wind that seemed to remember old things. And then came the nurse. She wore a white uniform, faded at the edges, like something left too long in sunlight. Her shoes made no sound as she crossed the gravel beside the station, and her cap sat slightly tilted on her dark hair. She walked with purpose, not the kind that says hurry, but the kind that says this has to be done. A young man stepped back, not out of fear, but out of instinct. She didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes were focused beyond the engine, toward the waiting carriage. The door opened without a sound this time. She entered, clutching something small in her hands, a cloth bundle, perhaps, or a folded letter. Once inside, she sat beside the old man. Neither looked at the other. No words. Number. Gestures. Just presence. The following night, at the same hour, a soldier came. Boots scuffed and uniform worn thin. He limped slightly on his left leg. He carried a photograph in one hand, dog tags in the other. His gaze was heavy, not angry, not sad, just tired, deep tired. The kind of tired that sleep can't fix. He paused at the base of the steps and glanced at the young man. Their eyes met for a second. The soldier gave a single nod, barely a movement, and entered the train. He took a seat across from the nurse, folding the photograph into his jacket pocket before resting both hands on his knees. Again. Silence. Again. No motion from the engine. The next night, a child appeared, barefoot, in pajamas too thin for the wind, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit by one ear. She didn't look scared, just curious. She walked straight down the middle of the platform, as if she knew the way, as if she'd done this before. The young man watched her small figure vanish into the carriage. This time, he noticed something else. The light inside the train glowed slightly warmer, faintly golden, like memory made visible. Still, the wheels did not turn. Still, the engine remained cold. And still, no one spoke. The fifth night brought a bride. Her dress, though once white, was now dust-streaked and wrinkled. She held a bouquet of wilted flowers that trembled slightly in her hands. Her veil was torn, caught by the breeze as she moved toward the train. She stopped at the edge of the platform and looked up at the night sky for a long time, as if asking for permission from something not visible to the eye. The door opened. She entered, and the train grew quieter, not empty, never empty, but quieter, like a room after a final goodbye. Each night at 3 a.m., another soul arrived. Each one carried something, a wound, a story, a silence too large to be spoken. And still, the train never moved. The young man began keeping watch from just behind the engine car, sitting in the same place, lantern beside him. He didn't try to speak. He didn't dare ask questions. He just watched and counted and wondered how many more were still on their way. It became a ritual. 3 a.m. Footsteps on gravel. A door that opened on its own. A new passenger finding their place in a train that hadn't moved in decades. And always the same silence. It wasn't a waiting room. It wasn't a ride. It was something else entirely. Something the young man was only beginning to understand. The seventh night felt heavier. There were no footsteps. No new passengers, only the whistle of wind against the tin roof of the old station, and the slow tick of a watch that had long since stopped telling time. The young man couldn't sleep. Not because he was afraid, but because something was missing. A piece of the puzzle he hadn't realized existed until now. He made tea, sat by the window, and stared at the train. 5 nights, 5 passengers. Each more vivid than the last. And still, the train hadn't moved an inch. He found himself back in the station office where most drawers were filled with dust, and the scent of paper too old to hold ink. He pulled open the bottom file cabinet, the one everyone always ignored. Its metal creaked with the groan of forgotten years. Inside, a ledger, old, stained. Its cover cracked and warped by heat. He opened it and flipped back through dates written in faded pencil, stopping at the final entry marked 36 years ago. Departure, 3 a.m. route, North Ridge. Line conductor, W. Thorne. Passenger count, 11. Final note, delayed by fog, proceeding. There was no arrival recorded. No return. No closure. Frowning, the young man scanned the shelves until he found a dusty envelope marked Incident Report, North Ridge. Inside were brittle sheets folded tightly, yellowed at the edges. He unfolded the first one with care. The headline. On the attached newspaper clipping read, "Tragic rail crash claims 11 lives, brake failure suspected." He blinked. 11? He kept reading. Train 17B derailed near Hollow Creek just after 3 a.m. last Tuesday morning. All 11 on board perished. Rescue teams arrived hours later to find the carriage partially submerged in the ravine. No survivors. Among the dead, a war veteran, a nurse from the city hospital, a young girl returning from a family visit, a recently married couple, and a retired schoolteacher. His eyes froze on the list. Each name, each face, each one he'd seen step silently onto the motionless train. One by one, he matched them. The nurse with the bundled cloth, the soldier with the dog tags, the child with the stuffed rabbit, the old man, the bride, all of them. All from that final ride. He felt the air shift in the room, colder now, like something unseen was watching, waiting. His fingers trembled as he turned the last page. A small note scribbled in the margin, likely by the conductor. Before the final departure, if something happens, tell them we were coming home. He looked out the window toward the train. For the first time, he understood. They weren't ghosts. They weren't dreams. They were passengers, still waiting to finish a journey that had never ended. The wind had stopped. No footsteps approached that night. No flicker of lantern light across the yard. Just silence, the kind that pressed against the windows and made every breath feel. Borrowed. 10 passengers. Each had come at the same hour. Each had walked the same path, climbed the same metal steps, and taken their place in the same still carriage. But the conductor's ledger, the one buried in the station's back drawer, had listed 11, always 11. The young man sat alone in the station house. The pages of the manifest spread before him like an accusation. 10 names had been checked. One was still waiting. But who? He looked toward the train. A single lantern flickered in the third car, the one no passenger had ever entered. His breath caught. Something about that light felt different. He stepped out into the night, gravel crunching beneath his boots. Each footstep echoed unnaturally, loud in the stillness. As he approached the train, he felt a resistance not of wind or cold, but of memory. The kind that clings to skin and whispers, doubts in your ear. The train door creaked open. The third car was empty. Dust covered the seats, but not evenly. Some were clear, as if someone had sat there recently. Others looked untouched for decades. At the far end, a mirror hung above the lavatory door. He'd never noticed it before. Drawn by something he couldn't name, he walked toward it. And stopped. The mirror was intact, its surface clean, but it didn't show his reflection. Where his body should have been, there's only the blurred image of the train behind him. The aisle, the flickering lantern, the empty seat. He stepped left. Nothing. He stepped right. Still nothing. His heart began to pound. He looked down. His hands were still there. His boots, his clothes, everything as it should be, but the mirror saw none of it. Only the train. Only the empty car. And then he heard it, the metallic groan of the carriage. Door sliding shut behind him. Click. Followed by a soft chime. A signal he'd never heard before. Outside, the station lights began to dim. The world beyond the glass started to blur. He wasn't alone. One by one, the 10 passengers emerged from the forward cars. They walked silently toward him, stopping just shy of the mirror. No anger, no fear, only acceptance. They looked not at him, but at the space where his reflection should have been. He understood. He was the 11th. Not the conductor, not the repairman. The last passenger, the one who had been waiting all along, without knowing why. The one who had rebuilt the train, not to fix it, but to remember. To complete the list. To take his seat, and perhaps, finally, let the train go. For years, the engine had been silent. Not a single piston moved. Not a single wheel turned. The locomotive had been little more than a rusted shell, a monument to time's slow forgetting. Until tonight, the moment the man placed his hand on the throttle, the train answered, not with noise, but with breath. A deep, resonant hum filled the iron bones of the machine, like a sleeping animal roused at last by the sound of its name. He didn't flinch. He didn't celebrate. He simply nodded once, as if this had always been the plan. Outside, the air was unnaturally still. No birds, no wind. The only movement was the steam curling from the engine, like ghostly fingers reaching for the sky. Inside the cars, the passengers sat as they always had, silent, upright, eyes steady. Some looked out the windows. Others clasped old objects, wedding rings, photographs, medals, rosary beads, fragments of lives left unfinished. But none spoke, and none looked at him. The man stepped into the conductor's cabin, his boots echoing against the metal floor. A faded timetable sat on the panel, one he had never seen before. The route was marked in red. The destination was not a place, but a time. He turned the brass key. The train lurched forward. Slowly, smoothly, inevitably. Lights blinked on one by one inside the cars. Old chandeliers hummed to life, casting golden pools over the passengers' faces. The train rolled past the edge of the forgotten platform, over tracks no one had walked in decades. past weeds and twisted signs and broken fences that now straightened. As if time itself had been waiting for this moment to restart, the young man gripped the controls. With steady hands, his reflection had not returned to the mirror because he was no longer who he'd been. He was part of the train now, part of the memory. Part of the journey. Through fog and field, the train moved like a shadow across the land, a black shape stitched into the quilt of night. Farmhouses blurred in the distance. Lights flickered in small towns. Dogs lifted their heads, then lay back down, uncertain whether they'd heard anything real at all. And inside that iron cathedral of silence, the passengers sat in perfect peace. No words, no fear, only a stillness that had waited nearly a century to be restored. And at the front of it all, the young man who had once tried to fix a machine, now guiding it toward its final destination. He didn't know if the train would return, but he knew where it was going, because every soul aboard already knew the way. The morning sun cast pale gold over the abandoned train station where silence now bloomed, like ivy across the cracked platforms and rust-bitten rails. And the people of the nearby town, those few who still remembered the man who worked the lifeless locomotive every day for years, found nothing when they came looking. No trace of the old train, no grease-stained tools, not even a footprint in the dust that hadn't already been there for decades. Only a single object resting by the edge of the track, like a final sentence punctuating a forgotten paragraph. A yellowed ticket, soft-edged and printed with ink that hadn't faded even after all these years. And on it just one line, handwritten in script, steady and deliberate, as if someone had waited a long time to write it. The delayed journey ease, now complete. And those who saw it didn't speak aloud what they felt, but it sat in their chest like a weight, like something sacred had passed through in the night while they were sleeping. And the strangest thing of all was how quiet the air had become, as if it too were holding its breath. And when one of the townsfolk finally dared to step onto the platform, they found the wooden boards still warm, not from sunlight, but as if someone had just been sitting there moments before. And though no one would say it directly, many glanced up the track with searching eyes, hoping for a sound steam, a whistle, the low thunder of something enormous leaving the edge of the world. But nothing came. Only the wind moving softly through the wires, whispering stories no one would believe. And at the diner that evening, people spoke in low voices about dreams they'd had the night before. Dreams of a train riding through a midnight landscape, its lights glowing like fireflies along a dark river, windows filled with faces that seemed almost familiar, an old man with a cane, a child in overalls, a nurse with kind eyes, a woman in a wedding dress, all staring out with calm expressions as the train moved toward something that was not a destination but a memory. Not an arrival but a return. And behind them, standing just inside the last car, was the young man, the one they'd thought was just eccentric, just stubborn, who had never spoken much but who had shown up every morning without fail, brushing off the dust of years and oiling dreams no one else remembered. And now he looked different, not older, not younger, but settled, as if all the pieces of him had finally come together into someone whole. And when someone asked the waitress at the diner what she made of it all, she only pointed to the tracks and said, "He was never waiting for the train to run, you know. He was waiting for it to remember." And somehow that made sense to everyone in a way they couldn't explain, because the station no longer felt like just a place. It felt like a promise kept, a thread tied back to itself, a circle closed. And as the weeks went on and the story spread beyond the town, people came just to stand on the platform and read the words on the ticket. Some crying, some smiling, but all leaving a little quieter than they'd arrived, like they'd heard something they didn't have words for. And that's when the legend began, that the train had taken its passengers not just away, but home, and that somewhere in the still hours of the night, if the world went quiet enough and your heart was listening, you might just hear the sound of wheels turning in the dark, and a whistle that carried the memory of every journey never finished. If this story moved something in you, please like, the video, subscribe, and ring the bell. It helps more people find their way to stories like this. Where are you watching from? What time is it there right now? Tell me in the comments how this story made you feel, because sometimes a train doesn't take you somewhere new. It simply takes you back to the part of yourself you thought was lost forever.